Something happened that it crashed. But now we're back in business. Let me share the screen. Okay. Dr. Haley Gemara. So we're about 6-7 lines from the bottom of Daf Tzadik on base. So yesterday we had the following discussion. There's this concept of Kesubos that a woman wants her children to get whatever she brought into the marriage. So if a woman predeceases her husband, so her husband yarshins all of her assets, we want that when her husband dies, the assets that she brought into the marriage shouldn't be distributed equally amongst all this man's children. Rather, they should be earmarked specifically for the children of this wife. And the shaila is, what do you do if there was two wives and one wife died before the husband and one wife died after the husband? So the yarshim of the second wife is taking their mother's assets, mitoris ksuba, not mitoris yerusha. Do you say ksuba is different in such a case where one group of children, one mother's children, are taking it mitoris yerusha, and the other mother's children are taking it mitoris balchoiv, collecting from the father's estate the mother's ksuba? So the Gemara says, we want to suggest that the next set of Tanoim that we're about to quote argue in this same machlokes. Because the Brisa says, the Tanya, Nosa Esa Rishona Umesa. A man married wife A and then she died while he was alive. Then Nosa Sashniya, then he married a second wife, Umes Hu, and now he died. So she doesn't yarshin, she's entitled to demand and collect ksuba from the state. But then she dies, and now her children are yarshining her. So what does the Tanakhama say? Boin baneh shalzu la'achar misa. After their mother died, they can come. V'noitlen ksubas iman, they could take from the estate their mother's ksuba. Now this Tana does not discuss at all what about the bnei harisha. What about the children of the first wife? So the Gemara assumes, and the Gemara is going to change from this eventually, but right now the Gemara assumes that since there's no mention at all of the Bnei Rishon, there is no special attention that they're getting. So what's going to happen is the Bnei Hasheni is going to come and seize and collect from the estate the ksuba of their mother. Whatever is remaining is going to be split equally amongst all this man's sons. But the Bnei Rishon will not have priority to take from the estate what was once their mother's. That's the Tanakhama. Reb Shimon Omer, no, we will allow the Kesubos B'nin Dichrin to apply. Im yesh moiser dinner, if even after the Bnei Rishon will take, so you have the Bnei Hasheni taken from the estate their mother's ksuba. Then you'll have the Bnei Rishon that will take from the estate their mother, what their mother originally brought into the marriage, their Kesubos B'nin Dichrin. And there's one extra dinner. If there's one extra dinner that can then be distributed evenly amongst all the sons, then Elu Noitlen Ksubas Ima, the second takes their ksuba of their mother, Elu Noitlen Ksubas Ima, and the Rishon can also take Ksubas Ima. Vimlav, but if there's not any extra money that can be distributed evenly amongst the brothers, then Cholkin B'Shal. So the Gemara says, My Labagam Eveli. At first glance, that's the machlokes. The Marasover Achas B'Chayev Achas B'Moisoi Yesh Len Kesubas B'nin Dichrin. Reb Shimon holds that even though these two sets of children are collecting from different places, the second set of children are not collecting out B'nin Dichrin. they're collecting because they're collecting their mother's ksuba. And it's only the bottom of the first are collecting with Kesubos B'Nedichrin, that's allowed, as Reb Shimon says. Umar Sover, but the Tanakama, who doesn't address the B'nei Rishon, it only addresses the B'nei Sheni, it seems to indicate that the B'nei Rishon do not get any special rights of B'nei Dichrin. And therefore, Umar Sover, Achas B'Chayov, B'Achas B'Moisoi, Ein Lahem Ksubas B'nei Dichrin. They will not have Ksubas B'nei Dichrin. Zok to Gemara, it seems like we have another set of Tanoim that argue in this exact subject. Zok to Gemara Loi, in fact, that's not what they're arguing about. Rather, both the Tanakama and Reb Shimon, the Chula Alma Achas B'Chayov, Achas B'Moisoi, Yesh Lahem Ksubas B'nei Dichrin. Everybody knows you would have Ksubas B'nei Dichrin, which would explain Reb Shimon very well. But the Tanakama said, in case there will not be Ksubas B'nei Dichrin. Why not? Zok to Gemara V'Hacha, this Machloikis is discussing a different Shaila. And I'm just going to turn the blot over to Tzadik Aleph Amud Aleph. V'Hacha B'Dinar Mekarkari Kamifli. Here, everybody agrees you will say Ksubas B'nei Dichrin if you have some extra that can be split evenly amongst all the brothers. The question is, this extra that can be split evenly amongst the brothers, can it be any asset? Stocks, bonds, cash, gold, or does it have to be karka? And in the case of this brisa, where Reb Shimon and the Chaim are arguing that we just quoted on the base, it's speaking where there was no karka extra of a dinner. Rather, there was just metaltlin of a dinner. And the machlokas is that enough to say that we've followed the Hilchos Yerusha D'Oraisa, and therefore the rest of the assets can be split up according to the Kesubos B'nei Dichrin. The Tanakama holds, Davka if it's karka, will you say there's something here left for the Yerusha D'Oraisa? But if it's metaltlin, no. And since in the case of the Brisa, there was metaltlin, the Tanakama says no Kesubos B'nei Dichrin. Therefore, only the children of the second wife collect their ksuba, not al Kesubos B'nei Dichrin. They collect it as a balchoif. Umar Savar and Reb Shimon holds afilu metaltli. Even metaltli is considered a shear, and therefore you will say Kesubos B'nei Dichrin. So, frankly, Gemara, you cannot say that. Amimach is Amar Hachi, but not Reb Shimon Omer afilu yesham nechasim she'ein lo machrayis ein klum. You can't argue that Reb Shimon holds non-karka is good enough, because the very next Mishnah that we're about to learn, Reb Shimon says very clearly, afilu yesham nechasim she'ein lo machrayis, even if there are extra nechasim, that can be split according to Yerusha Torah, but the extra nechasim are not karka, they're metaltlin, ein on klum, they have zero impact regarding Kesubos B'nei Dichrin. Ad sheyesham nechasim sheyesh lo machrayis. How much extra do you need? Yes, it'll base Kesubos dinner. There has to be more karka than to cover both Kesubos plus a little bit extra dinner. So Reb Shimon clearly holds that karka is not good. So you cannot say that the explanation of the brisa on the base is whether or not the taltlin is good for an extra. Let's suggest that they're arguing about something else. B'dinner mishabdi. What does that mean? It means that the estate has more karka, but the karka that the estate has is not right now in the estate. It's karka that's owed to the estate, and eventually it will be in the estate, but it's not there now. And that's the case where Reb Shimon and the Tanakama are discussing it. The Tanakama holds, even though there's karka coming into the estate, if it's not there right now, then we cannot use it, we cannot rely on it, and therefore we do not follow the rules of Kesubos B'nei Dichrin. Umar Sover, but Reb Shimon holds, even though that karka is not in the estate right now, but it's coming to the estate, it's owed to the estate, it's good enough to say that there's extra here, and therefore we will follow the Kesubos B'nei Dichrin. Frank the Gemara is Akash. We're assuming so far that the Rabbanon said you cannot follow B'nei Dichrin, and Reb Shimon says you do follow B'nei Dichrin. But if you analyze the actual wording that Reb Shimon used, it almost sounds like he's putting more limitations on when Kesubos Benin Dichrin applies than the Tanakama himself. Why? Because how did Reb Shimon respond to the Tanakama? He said, Im yesh moiser dinner. If, he's like putting a condition, when do I agree that you follow Kesubos Benin Dichrin? If there's a moiser dinner. That sounds like the Tanakama said, you always follow Kesubos Benin Dichrin. And Reb Shimon is saying it's limited to a case if there's moiser dinner. But the way we're understanding Reb Shimon, where it's the Chachamim who says you don't say Kesubos Benin Dichrin because it's B'mishabdi, and it's Reb Shimon who's being more relaxed about that. So what Reb Shimon should have said in his response to the Tanakama was Kivan sheyesham moiser diner mibayale. Reb Shimon would have said, he was arguing on the Tanakama who says you don't follow Kesubos Benin Dichrin, he should have argued and said you do follow. You know why you follow? Because there's moiser dinner. But he seems to be limiting it, im yesham, only under certain conditions. So Shimon seems to be saying that Kesubos Benin Dichrin applies in less cases than the Chachamim. But we're understanding the Machlokes is that Shimon holds it applies in more cases. So it doesn't make sense to say that that's the Shaila. Elo, let's suggest Bepachas Midinar Kamifli. Maybe what they're arguing about is a third subject, and that is if there's not a Moshe dinner, there's a Moshe half a dinner. There's no such thing as a free dinner. So let's say there wasn't a full dinner that was extra, was less than a dinner. Would that be enough to still allow the Kesubos Benin Dichrin to go through? Mar Savar dinner in Pachas Midinner loy, Umar Savar I feel Pachas Midinner. Frankly, it's a huge problem because if you look at the next Mishnah, Reb Shimon says quite clearly, black and white. For Reb Shimon, dinner kamar. Reb Shimon says it needs to be a minimum of a dinner. V'chik tema ebuch Tanakama. And if you want to flip around the shitas and say Reb Shimon says no, and the Chum say yes, but that won't work either because Tanakama de Masnizin. If we learn the next Mishnah, the Tanakama also is quite clearly Name dinner kamar. So both the Tanakama and Reb Shimon holds it has to be a dinner. So you cannot possibly say that the Machlokes Reb Shimon and the Tanakama is whether or not it's enough to have less than a dinner, because they both say quite clearly that there needs to be at least a dinner remaining. Zok to Gemara, what are we going to say? Ela kihanach trelishnoi kamoi ve'epich. So in order to explain this, I want to go back to the Brisa on Tzadik Amud Beis. So I'm just going to change the block for a second, because we have to see this inside, otherwise it'll be difficult to understand. So let's go back to the Brisa. When we originally learned this Brisa, so we're about 6 lines from the bottom, the Tanya Nasa Esa Rishayna Umesa, and then Nasa Sashnia Umesu, Boin Boneh Shalzu Lachar Misa V'Noitim Ksubasima. The way we understood that is that the Tanakama is saying that the children of the second one take their mother's ksuba, not out to Yerusha from the father, but rather by collecting on their mother's position. The Tanakama mentions nothing about the Yarshay or Rishon, so therefore we assume that the Tanakama holds that the halacha of Kesubos Benin Dichrin does not apply. And then Reb Shimon says maybe it does apply. Right? Now we had Shver. Why did Reb Shimon say Im Yesh Moshe Dinar? He should have said Kivan Sheyesh Moshe Dinar. Now we're going to turn everything over on its head. Because let's read the words of the Tanakama. It says, Boin Boneh Shel Zu Lachar Misa. The children of this woman after Misa come v'noitling subasiman. I touched it as referring to the children of the second wife, but it doesn't say that black and white. Zok Rashi, the Tanakama is speaking about the B'olam of the Rishon. Boneh Shel Zu means the Boneh of the Rishon can come after Misa and take Ksubas Iman, which means that the Tanakama is saying that Kesubos Benin Dichrin in fact does apply. Zok to Gemara, this cannot mean if it's not a Moshe Dinar, because we already said that Tanakama holds you need a Moshe Dinar. But there were 2 other shilas that the Gemara proposed could be what they're arguing about. A is if there's no karka, or B is if there's karka but it's not in the estate, it's merely owed to the estate. Zok to Gemara, is there a Rabbanan who are going to hold you say Kesubos Benin Dichrin? If there's metaltlin That'll be enough for the Bnei Rishon to collect Ksubas B'nei Dichrin. And Reb Shimon said no, only if yes Moshe Diner, meaning if there's karka, but a metalton won't be enough, and therefore there won't be a Ksubas B'nei Dichrin. So instead of saying the Chachamim held no B'nei Dichrin, Reb Shimon said yes, we're turning it over on its head, and it's the Chachamim who are saying yes B'nei Dichrin, and Reb Shimon are saying no B'nei Dichrin. And there were two different ways to learn that. There's actually three ways. Either the machlokes is the original machlokes of achas b'chayev, achas b'moisai. The Gemara wanted to deflect and say that's not what they're arguing. So the Gemara proposed that they might be arguing about if there's no karka, but there's metaltlin enough to split up, if that counts. So the Chacham said it does, and the Shimon will hold it doesn't. And the other pshat that the Gemara had was if there was karka, but it wasn't in the estate, it was merely owed to the estate. Again, the Chacham said that's good enough to activate the Kesubos B'nei Dichrin, and Reb Shimon says not. Okay, so let's go back to where we're holding on Daf Tzadik Aleph. So this is what the Gemara is saying. Zog to Gemara, Ella ki hanach treilish noi kamoi ve'epach. Let's use the two other terusim that the Gemara had, which is either there was metalton and not karka, or there was assets that belonged to the estate, but it wasn't in the estate yet, it was only owed to the estate. And let's say that it's the opposite of what we thought originally, and the Chachamim hold, you do say Kesubos B'nei Dichrin, and it's Reb Shimon who holds you don't. Amar Mar Zutra, to wrap things up. Amar Mar Zutra, Mishmei D'Rapah. Hilchos halacha l'maisa. Achas b'chayav v'achas b'moisa. So just to remind ourselves what this means. The normal classic case of Kesubos B'nei Dichrin is if two wives predeceased their husband. So the husband Yarshin them. And once the husband dies, technically all of his sons should get an equal portion. But Kesubos B'nei Dichrin states that the children of this mother will get whatever their mother brought into the marriage, and the children of the second mother will get whatever their mother brought into the marriage, and the extra that is in the estate over and above what each of the two women brought into the marriage will be split evenly amongst all of the sons. That's the classic case of B'nei Dichrin. Our Gemara brought in a non-conventional case where one wife predeceased her husband, but the other wife survived her husband. And therefore, instead of both sets of children coming to collect through Yerusha of their father, the second set of children are coming to collect their mother's Suba as a Balchoiv, as representing their mother. So that's Achas B'chayav. Achas B'moisoi, and the other set of children wants their Kesubos B'nei Dichrin through the Yerusha of the father. Do you say Kesubos B'nei Dichrin in such a case? Or maybe you say is that the second set of children collect on behalf of their mother their ksuba, and whatever's remaining is split evenly amongst all the children, which means the children of the first mother get the raw end of the stick. What is the halacha? Zog to Gemara, the halacha is achas b'chayev achas moisoi yesh lahen ksubas b'nei dichrin. There will be ksubas b'nei dichrin, and we'll protect the children of the first wife, and they'll get first dibs of the remaining Yerusha to fulfill their mother's Suba, and then the mana that's left over, or the dinner that's left over, they'll split evenly. The second halacha we had was a ksuba nasis moishel lechavot. Remember we discussed that in order to have ksubos b'nei dichrin, there has to be extra assets available to split evenly amongst all the children. So what happens if after the children of the second wife took their ksuba, there was just enough to fulfill the kesubos b'nei dichrin of the children of the first wife, but not one dinner extra? Will that mess up the kesubos b'nei dichrin? Or maybe, since the estate as a whole paid off a choiv, meaning paid off the ksuba of the second wife, the paying off of a ksuba also counts as Yerusha D'Oraisa, which will then enable us to follow the kesubos b'nei dichrin. So once again, the Gemara paskin, uksuba nasis moiser lechavot. The fact that the ksuba was paid, even though there's only enough left in the estate to fulfill the kesubos b'nei dichrin of the first set of children, that's good enough because it's not considered that we mevatel Yerusha Daraisa because that payment of the ksuba is fulfilling the Yerusha Daraisa. Fact Gemara, why do I need to tell you both halachas? Let's think about it. The second halacha of ksuba nasas moshe lechaverta, that could only be in a case where one woman survived her husband and one woman did it. So if you're going to say ksuba nasas moshe lechaverta, by definition you have to say that there's also ksubas b'nin dichrin when one set of children are from a living mother and one set of children was from a dead mother. So that by definition is acha b'chayev acha b'moisei. That's what the Gemara is going to ask. So fact the Gemara, bishlama iyashmiinon achas b'chayev achas b'moisei. I understand just telling us that achas b'chayev achas b'moisei yesh lam ksubas b'nin dichrin is not enough, because v'lo yashmiinon ksuba nasas moisei l'chaverta, if we wouldn't have been taught the second halacha as well, ksuba nasas moisei l'chaverta, havamina, I would have thought, when do you say achas b'chayev achas b'moisei? That's the ikei moisei dinner in. That's if even after we take the ksuba of our mother, and even after the Rishonim take the ksuba of their mother, there's still extra money in the estate. That's when you'll say achas b'chayev achas b'moisei. But iloi loi, if there's only enough for the two ksubas and nothing else, then you wouldn't say ksubas b'nin dichrin. So that's why we needed the second psak that the ksuba is also considered moisei l'chaverta. Elo lishmein and ksuba nasas moisei l'chaverta. Why didn't Rav Papa tell us only the halacha of ksuba nasas moisei l'chaverta? But no yudana, and I would figure out obviously the only way this can happen is mishum da'achas b'chayav v'achas b'moisei yesh lehen ksubas b'nin dichrin. So the question is, why didn't Rav Papa just tell us that ksuba nasas moisei l'chaverta? And from that I would have already known that achas b'chayav v'achas b'moisei we say ksubas b'nin dichrin, because that's really the only way that the question of ksuba nasas moisei l'chaverta would be relevant. Zot Gemara, no. I'm going to show you a case where you don't have a case of achas b'chayev achas b'moisei. In fact, both sets of children are not coming mikoich the mother; they're coming yarshaning their father. Yet we still need a ksuba to be the extra. How do you have that? Because yashmin haki havamina kavod shenosa sholosh nosha. What if a man married three women? Umesu shtayim b'chayav. Two of these women died in his lifetime. So there's two families that are going to be fighting for their ksubas b'nin dichrin. The third wife, achas b'moisei, the third wife survived him, and then she died. But she's not coming to Yarshin. Her children aren't coming to Yarshin. Why are her children not coming to Yarshin? Because v'hachta mayis la'achar misa, the woman who died after the man died, yoel dis nekevahi, she only had a daughter. V'lav bas rushi. So now let's have a look. First, this daughter, representing her mother, will get what's owed to her ksuba. Now, whatever's left is going to be split evenly. Is going to be split between the two families. Now, do you follow ksubas b'nin dichrin or not? Here, it's not achas b'chayev achas b'moisei. Both these two families, their mother predeceased the father. The question is, you say ksubas b'nin dichrin if there's not a penny extra to split evenly. On that, we have a halacha that since they paid off the third wife and her daughter with the assets before they split the remaining assets, that's good enough to allow the ksubas b'nin dichrin in these two families that the wife predeceased the husband. Zok to Gemara, so that's the case where we would say that ksuba nasa moisei l'chaverta. But achas b'chayev achas b'moisei, aval achas b'chayev achas b'moisei, v'ha the la'achar misa you're led the zachahi, and the woman who's collecting the ksuba has a son, so he's also in the parasha to yarshin the father. Maybe Chazal did not set up ksubas b'nin dichrin because this son who collected his mother's ksuba is also going to want to take a piece of the Yerusha from his father, and that's going to lead to a fight. So maybe they didn't set up the halacha of ksubas b'nin dichrin in that instance. Kamash v'lan that even there they set up ksubas b'nin dichrin. So we learned a lot of factoids about ksubas b'nin dichrin, and it can be confusing. So I just want to run through it very quickly. So we discussed ksubas b'nin dichrin is if one wife brought $1 million into the marriage and one wife brought in $500,000 into the marriage, each woman wants their children to get what they brought into the marriage. But the problem is, if they predeceased their husband, everything gets mixed up into one pot, and it belongs to the husband, and it'll be split evenly amongst all the children. Kesubos B'Nidchrin says we protect each woman's chelik, and we'll earmark from the husband's Yerusha to these boys whatever their mother brought in, and to these boys whatever their mother brought in. But there's a couple of conditions. A, there has to be some extra asset there, at least of a dinner, that could be split according to the Yerusha of the Torah, because the Rabbanan aren't going to wipe out completely the Yerusha of the Torah. Then there was a question, what type of assets does it have to be? Do these assets have to be karka assets, or could they even be metaltalin assets? Do these assets have to be in the estate right now, or is it enough if these assets are owed to the estate and will come at a later date? And then there was a question of what if one set of children are not being Yerush, but they're collecting their mother's ksuba because she survived her husband. Would you say Kesubos B'Nidchrin there as well? And then the last question was, if paying off a chayiv is considered enough of a manifestation of Yerusha to allow Kesubos B'Nidchrin. So that basically covers all the different rules we had regarding Kesubos B'Nidchrin. Now, there was a story in the Aguda where someone did not want to pay up his membership, but he owed to the shul. And we know David Kleiner is very good at collections, and he was hounding and hounding. So the guy gave him a check. So David was not sure that this check would work. The check was for $1,000. So David went to his bank account and asked the teller if she could certify the check. And she said she can certify the check. So David said, let me ask you a question. If I deposit $200 into this account, would you then be able to certify the check? And she said, maybe. So he deposited $200 into the account, and then he certified a $1,000 check. The next day, the guy comes screaming at him, Jewel, you got it what you are. You stole $1,000 from me. So sometimes by adding money to the mix, you can solve a problem. So we're going to discuss a similar issue by Kesubos B'Nidchrin. Because imagine there's a husband who had two wives. One of his wives brought $10 million into the marriage, and they had one son together. The other wife brought in a penny, and she has 10 kids. Now, what's going to happen is, when this man dies, this one son wants his $10 million, and he doesn't want to share it with the 10 kids whose mother brought in a quarter. What happens if there's only $10 million and one quarter in the estate when the father dies? This poor kid, instead of getting $10 million, now has to share it with his half-brothers. He's not happy about that. So he might say, you know what, let me put $500 into the estate so that at least I can get my Kesubos B'Nidchrin. So he could do that when his father's alive. But let's see what happens if he tries to do it after his father dies. A man was married to two women, and they both died. They predeceased him. And then the father died. And each set of Yisayim want their mother's ksuba. But but there's no extra. There's only exactly enough for the two ksubas, and not enough to even split up something up in the Torah. Too bad. The kid who wanted that $10 million from his mother has to share it with the other 10 brothers. But dinner, if there was even one extra dinner in the estate, then we have the rule of Kesubos B'Nidchrin, Elu Noitlen Ksubas Iman, the Elu Noitlen Ksubas Iman. So the son of the woman who brought $10 million into the estate will get the $10 million, and his 10 brothers will have to share a quarter, which is 2.5 cents per child. So they'll each get their 2 cents. Zog to Gemara, Im Amr Yosy, what if these Yosy say the Yosy who are going to get the $10 million realize that there's not enough, and they don't want to share the $10 million? So they'll say, Anachnu Mailim al Nichse Avinu Yafadiner. So this doesn't mean they're actually throwing money into the estate. What it means is there's a piece of property in this estate that's worth $100,000. I'm willing to buy this property for $150,000. So I want to now inflate the value of one of the assets, which will then push the value of the estate over the threshold to allow the Kesubos B'Nedichrin, Kadesh Yitlu Kesubos Imon, to enable, to trigger the Kesubos B'Nedichrin. The halacha is Ein Shaymulan, you can't. Rather, you take a snapshot at the time of the death, and that value determines whether or not Kesubos B'Nedichrin will apply. Elishaman is on the Chosim Bevezin, they're assessed on Bezin, Hoyusham, period. What about Hoyusham the Chosim B'Roy? What if there were not enough assets to have extra, but there was money owed to the estate? It doesn't mean owed, Rashi says. What this means is this man died. In his estate, we don't have enough that there should be extra on top of the Kesubos B'Nedichrin. But the grandfather was still alive, and he had a lot of money. And when he dies, that money is going to come down through the estate. That doesn't count. Right now, it's not here. Right now, the grandfather is still alive. The Gemara, probably someone tiny today, could be the reason why this halacha is because we don't want to incentivize children to kill their grandparents or to send them to a hospital in Canada. Rab Shimon says, Afilu yesham nechasim she'ein la machrayis. Even if there's nechasim in the estate, but they're non-karka nechasim, ein on klum, it's useless as far as the B'Nedichrin is concerned. Ad yushab nechasim sheyesh la machrayis yoser al shtei ksubos dinner. Greater than 2 ksubos, 1 extra dinner. And we already had this earlier today, so we know what this means. Taner Rabbanan. Lazu Elef, one mother brought 1,000 dinner into the marriage, Lazu Chamish Meis, and one brought 500 dinner into the marriage. Im Yesha Moiser dinner, if there's 1,500 plus 1 dinner in the estate, then we apply Kesubos B'Nedichrin, Elu Noiten Kesubos Iman, Ve'elu Noiten Kesubos Iman. Bimla, but if there's only exactly enough to fulfill both Kesubos, then we do not engage in Kesubos B'Nedichrin, and Yecholku B'Shava, the estate is split evenly amongst all the children. So the Chaim want to know, what is the chiddush of this brisa over the Mishnah? This is really a repeat, word for word, of what the Mishnah said. So the Chaim say that there's 2 ways why the children will walk Kesubos B'Nedichrin. There's one way, what if both mothers brought in the same amount to the marriage? There would still be a need for Kesubos B'Nedichrin, because they could have each brought $1 million, but one woman maybe only had 1 child, and he would get $1 million. The other woman had 10 children, so each of her children will only get 100,000. So for that alone, we want Kesubos B'Nedichrin, even though both mothers brought in the same amount, but we still want to protect and keep the money that one woman brought in and keep it in her family, that it should go to her sons. That's what I would think is Pashut Pshat in Kesubos B'Nedichrin. So the Bryce here is telling us that even if they brought in a different amount of money, even there we'll say Kesubos B'Nedichrin. Zok the Gemara weiter. What happens if the value of the estate at the time of death changes? Pshita, if it's merubim v'nesmait, if at the time of death there was enough to trigger the Kesubos B'Nedichrin, but then stock market crashed, real estate crashed, and by the time they did the chalukah, there was no longer enough. Do we eliminate Kesubos B'Nedichrin, or we say that since it was triggered at the death, you follow through with Kesubos B'Nedichrin? Zok the Gemara, Kfar Zachu Behen Yorshim. The Yorshim were already Zaycha. The children who benefit from the Kesubos B'Nedichrin already retain their right to get their mother's contribution. What about Mu'at V'Nisrabu? What about the time of death? There was not enough Nechasim, and there would not be Kesubos B'Nedichrin. So that would favor the children who are going to get less. But then, before they split it up, there was an inflation, and the estate became worth more. So now the children who are benefiting from the B'Nedichrin says, we want it. My what's Allah? Zokmar Toshima. Because this happened with the Nichsei the Bei Bar Tzirtzur. The Nechazim of Bei Bar Tzirtzur was a case of Mu'atim V'Nisrabu. At the time of death, there was not enough to do Kesubos B'Nedichrin, but then they were inflated, they went up in value, and now there is enough. V'Nisrabu happened. They asked the Shiloh by Reb Amar what to do. Amar Lahu, he told them, Zilu Paisinu. The children who did not want the Kesubos B'Nedichrin, the children whose mother didn't bring in so much to the marriage, and they wanted to be able to get what the other one brought into the marriage, you better deal with your half brothers who want the B'nin Dichrin, because I believe they have a right to it, even though the value only went up later. So you better work it out with them. Lo yashkachu, they ignored Rav Amram's psak, and they were pushing that they should just split it evenly. Amalhu, Rav Amram warned them, if you're not going to work it out with your brothers because they're in the right, I'm going to slap you, I'm going to whip you, with a whip that although it stings, it leaves no mark. It doesn't make you bleed. In other words, I'm going to put you on chayav. It's a punishment that doesn't leave a mark. They didn't want to accept Rav Amram's psak. So Shadrinu l'kamedi Rav Nachman. They went to Rav Nachman. Now Rav Nachman was the most powerful posek of the generation. His family was very well connected, and he would be able to override anybody's psak. And Rav Nachman sided with them. Amar Levi told them, Kishem shemarubin b'nis maitu zachu. So let's turn over the blot to Amud Beis. The same way, if it was Reuben b'nis maitu zachu ben Yarshim, the children who want the B'din Dichrin locked in, and they get to do B'din Dichrin, kach muatim v'nis rabu. So too in the opposite case, zachu ben Yarshim, the Yarshim who don't want the B'din Dichrin are soicha, and you don't have to follow B'din Dichrin. I'm overruling Rav Amram's pshat. Beautiful. So we don't seem to have a resolution, but we seem to have Rav Nachman is paskening that you always follow the time of the death. Okay, now that we got into this thing about paying off, the one of the children wanted to add money to the estate so that it should be the Chasam Reuben. So we're going to discuss similar cases that aren't directly relevant to the Shaila, but we go off on a tangent. As Kesubos is known to be a Shas Gemara, so we go off on tangents. Who governed Avamaski Bay Alpha Zuzim. Someone owed 1,000 zuz. So of course, any property that he owned would be mishubed to collection if he doesn't pay up. And in fact, he had property. Havalei Trey Apadni. He had two little apartments. He had two houses. Zavinu Chada b'chamish me'ah v'chada b'chamish me'ah. And the way the Rishonim learned is he sold both of these to the same person, each for 500 zuz. And he still didn't pay up his loan, this seller. Also b'achoy, so the b'achoy of the seller came to the buyer. Tarfa l'chad minayu. He seized one property worth 500 zuz. He's halfway there. Hadar katarf leidach. Now he wanted to go seize the other one so that he can collect his full 1,000 zuz. But the lakeach wanted to salvage his purchases, and he wanted to prevent this malva, this b'achoy of his seller from taking away his property. So this is what he did. Shakal alfa zuzah. He took $1,000 in cash, which was a full loan. And he went over to this malva, this balchoiv, who was making a move on the second property. And the Amalei told him, Ishavi lach alfa zuzah, if you'll accept the first property that you purchased, that you seized for me, if you accept it as 1,000 zuz, and now it's taking care of your whole choiv, so you will not come and seize my second property, lachya, then you'll be okay. You'll at least end up with one property. But v'lo, if you're going to be a chazer and you're going to want to seize my second property, shkil alfa zuzah, here's the cash of full 1,000, v'istalik, and now you got to give me back both properties. So he was banking on the fact that this fellow wants property. So therefore, he was pressuring him to accept that property for 1,000, which he was obviously willing to pay for it 1,000. So he was valuing it that, and therefore he was demanding the money back. So what is the halacha in such a case? Can the purchaser do that? So some of Rabbi Bar Chama wanted to say he can't do that because he wanted to bring a raya from our Mishnah that he can't do it. So Rabbi Bar Chama, that's similar to the case of our Mishnah where you can't put money in. And you can't do it. Rabbi told Rabbi Bar Chama, you're wrong. Of course you can do it. Me dummy, how could you compare our case with the Malva and the Leiva and the Lekeah to the case of the Yisoimim? If we allow the richer Yisoimim to add to the estate, well, you know who's losing? The other Yisoimim are losing. Because if we do B'nai Dichrin, they lose all the other part of the estate. So they don't want B'nai Dichrin. They would rather split it all evenly, like the Deraisa Dika rules of Yerusha. So sure, when you're causing damage to the assignment. There you can't put the money in. But Hacham, who's losing? The Malva is getting paid in full. Alpha Yohiv, Alpha Shaka. He's paid in full. So there, of course, you would allow it. Now, Tosfos tells us that in general, forget this complicated case. What happens if you buy a property from somebody, and then a week later, the Malva of your seller comes and takes your property away because you owe the money? Let's say the Chaim is $10,000. Are you allowed to pay him out with money? He said, no, I'm not giving you the property. Here's money. Or maybe he can say, I don't want your money. I have a shibud on this karka. I have nothing with you that you should pay my chayv. So since I have a shibud on this karka, whether you like it or not, even if you want to pay me off, I can still take the karka away. So there's actually a machloikis in Bava Metzia what the halach is. When a malva comes to seize karka from a lekeach, can the lekeach pay him off with cash or not? So Tosfos wants to say that's the machloikis here between Rabbi Bar Chama and Rava. Rabbi Bar Chama holds that normally you can never pay off. A lekeach can never pay off a malva. Therefore, here he can't do it either. And the malva can grab the second property. But according to Rava, a malva is allowed to pay off. I'm sorry, a buyer could pay off the malva. And therefore, here is no different. He can tell the malva either be happy with the one property that you have, or I'll pay you off in full and you don't get a penny.
I don't understand. Can you clarify the case? He just bought these two properties for $500 each.
Correct.
The guy's owed $1,000.
Correct.
He's in first position for both of these properties. So
who's in first position?
The lender.
Correct.
So the buyer says to him, take the first one like it's worth $1,000, or I'll give you $1,000.
Correct. Or I'll pay you off, and then you don't get anything.
So the first property is only worth $500. He only paid $500 for it.
Well, obviously, by me offering you $1,000 for it, obviously I'm willing to pay more for it.
Who's offering
automatically by me? You know how it works in real estate. The last sale price is the value. So yeah, I'm jacking up the value.
He paid for it $500.
Well, it's what I paid for it. What it's worth now is $1,000.
Why is it worth $1,000 now?
Because I'm willing to pay $1,000.
I'm willing to pay $1,000 for both. Isn't he saying I'll pay $1,000 for both? Take $1,000.
No, either accept the property as $1,000, or I'm going to give you $1,000 cash, and then I'm going to take back the property that you already took.
Which means that the property is only worth $500.
Whatever you want to value
keeping two properties. So okay, for that, the math aside, which I don't understand, the math aside,
right?
Is this saying that the lender has no choice but to accept one of these two offers? Is that what's going on here, or is this just a negotiation?
That's what Rava holds. Correct.
Rava is holding that he has no choice. He has to accept one of these two offers.
Correct.
Okay.
So now the question is, we want to see how we can make money. This buyer is a smart guy. Well, now that the guy said, okay, you know what? I'll take the property and don't give me the $1,000, right? So now the question is, when I bought this property with a price, so I now can go back to the seller and claim my losses. So can I claim back 500 or can I claim 1,000? Because the fact is, I got him to accept this in lieu of $1,000.
This is exactly like the Yankel Lev hat story.
The what?
The Yankel Lev hat story.
Very good.
You know the hat story.
Yeah. Except this wasn't 70 years later. Okay, so Zak to Gemara. What about the tirfa? Tirfa, in other words, Bezdin writes a star that this loikeach had his property taken away by a balchoiv of the seller. And how much money was it worth? In other words, how much money can it go back and claim from the person who sold him this property? Ravina says we can write that $1,000 property was seized from him, and he can go back and claim the full $1,000 from the loiva, from the seller. No, he can only claim back what he paid for it. And the loch is b'chama shmeya. Now we're going to have another case that's virtually identical, except the Mefarshim tell us that instead of it being one buyer who bought both properties, it was two different buyers who bought two different properties. And the reason why the Gemara repeats the case is to tell you that even if it was two different buyers, you could still do this same shtick. Who gathered have a maske be meyazuzah? He owed 100 zuz. Havale trey continue the area 2 little pieces of property. Chad zevinu bechamshin. He sold one for 50 to A. The chad bechamshin to B. Also, the B'chayv came and seized one of the properties from one of the buyers. Now he wants to go seize the other buyer's property. So the second buyer, Shakal Kovzuzi, he took 100 zuz. And he went over to the B'chayv. And he told him, if the field that you took from the other guy, you'll value at 100 zuz and be happy, lachya, then you'll be able to keep it. If not, Shakal Kovzuzi, I'm going to pay you out the full 100, and you're going to lose both pieces of property. Same halacha. So and the Mulebaye Midami Hasabis will play to the Asme, Hakamai Pseda Islay, Mea Yoev, Mea Shakil. The Tirfa become a Chasvina, Ravina Amar B'Meya, Ravir Amar, B'Chamshin, B'Ilchata B'Chamshin. Okay, so now we're going to go to another case, again, similar, but not the same. It's on Yom Kippur, it's Geschmack to learn on Yom Kippur all these different deredlich to make money. Hahu Gavra Davamaskebe Meya Zuzi. There was a man who owed 100 zuz. Shachav, he died. So the loiva died, and now his estate owes 100 zuz. Now, Metatal they asked me, so the only chance that this Malva has to collect from the estate is if he could find property. Shava Katina the Ira Shava Chamishin Zuzi. He did leave a piece of property, but it was only worth 50 zuz, which is only half of what his chayv was. But half is better than nothing. Also, B'chayv, the Katarfle. So the B'chayv came to seize that property. Also, Yasmin didn't want to lose the property, so they decided to pay off the Malva, but not his full chayv, only what the property was worth to salvage the property. So he took the 50 zuz, and he says, thank you very much. Now I want your karka. Why? Because it's meshuvah to be for the second 50 zuz. Hada Katarfle. So they came to Abaye to see if he has a right to do that. Amalan, he told him, of course he has a right to do that. Mitzvah ala Yisayim l'froya chayv aviyim. The fact that they paid back the first 50 was because there's a mitzvah, the Rabbanon, it's covered for the father to pay off his chayvus. And that's why they're doing it. They weren't redeeming the field. Hanu kamoi, the first payment, mitzvah of disu. You did a mitzvah. But there's still $50 of the chayv outstanding that the kak is mishubah to pay. Hashta kitarif bedin kitarif. However, we're going to give the Yisayim and Eitzah how they could have done this transaction and salvaged it. V'loy Amran, Abai didn't say this halacha that they lose the karka as well. Is only the loy amrulay if they didn't tell him when they were redeeming the property. Hani chomshin zuzay demei the arakatina. We're not paying up our father's chayv here. We're buying this property off you. Avol amr hani chomshin zuzay demei the arakatina. But if they say that this money is not to pay off our father's chayv, we're just buying this property from you, so now the property belongs to them. It's not meshubah anymore to the chayv of their father. And therefore, Salukis al-Kua, they've succeeded in pushing him off, because there's no more karkois left in the estate, and the karka that we have is ours now. It's not part of the estate, because we bought it with our own money, and therefore, they have at least salvaged $50. Now we have a real sleazebag. You know these guys in yeshiva are always looking to make a buck here, a buck there. So listen to this guy. He went to his friend in yeshiva, and he tells his friend, my mother is not married to my father anymore. My father died. My mother remarried. So I'm willing to sell you when my mother gets divorced, and she'll get the Kesuba. I'm going to yashin her eventually because she's going to die. I'm willing to sell you that. How much are you going to pay me for that? That's called a very, very risky options trader. Hahu Gavra. Now, it's not worth much to buy that right, because a lot of things have to happen for it to line up. First of all, the marriage has to break up through death or through a divorce. And then after that happens, the mother has to die so that the son will yashin, and then he sold his rights. So that therefore you wouldn't pay much for that, but it's like buying an options. If it's in the money, then you can cash out. But you can't rely on anything. And he also said, if my mother comes and is mavatal the mechira because it's hers, not mine, I'm not paying you. In other words, there's even one more thing that can work against you. My mother can protest. So even after all this risk, this smart aleck decided that he's going to buy this option. And you know what? His lucky stars hit, everything lined up, bang, and now he wants to collect. Shchiva Ime, the mother died, V'loyer Ara, and she didn't protest, and she got a Yerusha, and now the son gets it. So the guy who bought the option hit the jackpot. He wants to now collect. But the person who sold him this option, the Kama'ar, he said, now that I'm in my mother's position, I could be Ma'ar on her behalf. That's a sleazebag. Savar Rabbi Bar Chama L'Meimar. Rabbi Bar Chama's first thought to say, well, let's think about it. He, now that his mother died, is in his mother's position. So he could be Ma'ar, and he could really rip off the guy who sold it to him. Now Rashi says Abada he would have to refund the purchase price, but the purchase price was nothing. It was the jackpot that he gets to keep. But Rava said, I don't think so. I understand he told this fellow that if my mother protests, too bad for you. That's all he said. If he himself would protest, that of course is not a condition that the purchaser would have accepted. So of course, in this case, he can no longer be ma'ar. He would have to pay out on that option. How about another funny case? Reuven had a field, but Reuven owed a lot of money. And he sold Shimon this field, but he told Shimon, if my Baal Chayv comes and sees it from you, don't come back to me. This is an as-is sale. And then then Reuven went, this is a Yaakov story. And then Reuven went and bought the property back from Shimon, but he told Shimon, if it gets seized from you, you have to pay me. And what happened? But also, let's go on to the next daf. We also, Baal Chayv de Reuven Baal Chayv came, the Qatar V'lei Minei, and seized the property from Reuven, which he bought from Shimon. Dinahu, the Ozil Shimon Mafsilei. Shimon has to pay back Reuven, even though the karka was seized from Reuven by Reuven's Baal Chayv, because he can go back to Shimon. Amalei Rava, I don't think so. Nihida Achrayis, the Alma Kabbalah. Sure, Shimon was Makabal Achrayis, but that's Achrayis if somebody other than Reuven's own Baal Chayv would come and seize it. Achrayis to Nafshe, if Reuven's own Baal Chayv is going to come and take it away, mi Kabbalah, you can't argue that even that Shimon accepted upon himself. So in fact, Shimon would not have to pay Reuven back. However, Umoider Rava, that if the person who seized it from Reuven was not Reuven's Baal Chayv, rather it was Reuven's father's Baal Chayv, Umoider Rava Reuven Sheyire Shadim Yaakov. If Reuven got this field from his father, and then Umachar LeShimon Shaloi Bachrayis, and then Vasa Shimon Umachar LeReuven Bachrayis. So this is the exact same story as before, except now we know the origin of this field by Reuven. It's because he yarshed it from his father. The Yaakov and not Reuven's own creditor, but his father's creditor came. Then Dinahu the Ozil Shimon Umafsalim. Then in fact Shimon will have to pay back Reuven. My time, B'chayv the Yaakov ke B'chayv Domodomi. This is not Reuven's Baal Chayv. This was Yaakov's Baal Chayv. It's like a completely external Baal Chayv, and therefore Shimon is a Chayv for it. Okay, we'll stop here, and the Mitchell will be mamshach tomorrow. I want to wish everybody get in fittel. I hope everybody had a good fast, and thank you for coming after a busy Yom Kippur and Sukkot. We're all here, so we should continue to be healthy and be able to learn the blood after blood.
Yeah, back to the normal time tomorrow. 6 o'clock.
Yeah, so tomorrow we're going to learn about 6 o'clock. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, so you and I will talk at some point tomorrow morning,
Yes.
or whenever you say.
Yeah, let's do tomorrow morning. Let's do tomorrow morning. Maybe after share.
By the way,